The sun cast long shadows across the dusty wagon train as Clara Anderson clutched her 5-year-old son Thomas to her chest, his small body burning with fever that had come on suddenly and without warning. The Dakota Territory stretched endlessly before them, the nearest settlement at least 2 days' ride away, and Clara had never felt more alone or terrified in her life. "He's getting worse," Clara whispered to the elderly woman beside her, Mrs. Holloway, who had been helping tend to Thomas since he'd fallen ill the previous morning. "His breathing is so shallow now." Mrs. Holloway placed a weathered hand on Thomas's forehead and frowned deeply. "This ain't no ordinary fever, child. The boy needs a doctor, and soon." Clara fought back tears as she looked around the makeshift camp, where their wagon train had stopped for the night. 8 families had set out from Illinois 2 months earlier, headed for Oregon Territory in search of new beginnings. Clara had joined them after her husband died of pneumonia back east, leaving her a widow at 26 with a young son to raise alone. The promise of free land and a fresh start had seemed like the answer to her prayers. Now, as Thomas shivered and moaned in her arms despite the warm June evening of 1872, those dreams felt impossibly distant. "Ma," Thomas's voice was barely audible, his eyes glassy with fever. "I'm thirsty." "Here, sweetheart." Clara held a canteen to his parched lips, letting him take small sips. When he turned his head away, too weak to drink more, panic clawed at her chest. The wagon train's leader, Mr. Simmons, approached Clara's wagon with a grim expression. "How's the boy?" "Failing," Mrs. Holloway answered before Clara could find her voice. "He needs a doctor, and quick, Mr." Simmons removed his hat, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. "Nearest town is Fort Laramie, 2 days' journey at best." "He may not have 2 days," Mrs. Holloway said bluntly. Clara tightened her arms around her son, the only family she had left in the world. "There must be something we can do," a voice called from the edge of their circle. "I might be able to help." Clara looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. As he stepped forward into the light of their campfire, she saw a man perhaps 30 years of age, trail-worn but strong, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His clothes marked him as a cowboy: faded denim pants, a simple shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing tanned forearms, and boots caked with the dust of long travels. "Garrett Lawson," he introduced himself, removing his hat respectfully. "I was passing by and saw your wagons. Thought you folks might have supplies to trade." "Are you a doctor?" Clara asked, hope flaring briefly. "No, madam," Garrett replied, his eyes lingering on the sick child in her arms. "But I know these territories better than most. Been working cattle drives through here for 7 years now." He stepped closer, his expression softening as he observed Thomas. "May I?" Clara nodded, and Garrett placed a gentle hand on the boy's forehead. "How long has he been like this?" he asked. "Started yesterday morning," Clara said. "Just a slight fever at first, but it's gotten worse by the hour. Now he can barely stay awake." Garrett's brow furrowed. "Could be mountain fever. Seen it before in these parts." He looked at Mr. Simmons. "There's a doctor in Silver Creek. It's about 40 miles northeast of here." "Silver Creek?" Mr. Simmons shook his head. "That's not on our route. We'd lose days." "The whole train wouldn't need to go," Garrett said. "But someone needs to get that boy to a doctor." Clara felt desperation rise within her. "I'll take him. If someone could spare a horse." "You can't go alone, Mrs. Anderson," Mr. Simmons interrupted. "It's too dangerous." "I'll take you," Garrett said, the words coming out before he seemed to fully consider them. Something in his eyes, determination perhaps, or recognition of the desperate situation, made Clara believe him instantly. "You would do that, for strangers?" she asked. Garrett shrugged, but his casual gesture was betrayed by the intensity in his gaze. "I know what it's like to need help and not have it come." Mr. Simmons stepped closer to Garrett, studying him suspiciously. "How do we know we can trust you with one of our own?" "You don't," Garrett answered honestly. "But that boy needs a doctor and I know the way. I can get them there faster than your wagon train could." Mrs. Holloway stood up, her arthritic joints crackling. "He's right, Simmons. The child needs help now, not after we deliberate for hours." Clara looked down at Thomas, whose cheeks were flushed scarlet against skin otherwise pale as milk. "I'll go with Mr. Lawson," she said firmly. "I have no choice." "Then I'm coming too," Mrs. Holloway declared. Garrett shook his head. "With respect, madam, you'd slow us down. I need to ride hard and fast. Mrs. Anderson and her boy are all I can take." Mrs. Holloway pursed her lips but didn't argue. "Take my horse," offered one of the younger men from the wagon train. "She's swift and sure-footed." "We'll need supplies," Garrett said, "all business now. Water, food, blankets, and something to keep the boy stable during the ride." The camp erupted into activity. Women gathered blankets and food, men checked over the horses that would be used. Clara rushed to her wagon to collect a few essential items, and the small bag of coins she'd kept hidden in a secret compartment beneath the wagon seat all that remained of her savings. As she packed a small bundle, Mrs. Holloway approached. "You sure about this, Clara? Going off with a stranger?" Clara glanced over at Garrett, who was checking the cinch on his saddle. "I don't have a choice. Thomas is all I have left." Mrs. Holloway nodded, then pressed something into Clara's hand, a small knife in a leather sheath. "Just in case," she whispered. 20 minutes later, Clara stood beside Garrett's horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding with a white blaze. Thomas had been wrapped snugly in blankets and secured to Garrett's chest with long strips of cloth, fashioned into a kind of carrier that would keep him stable during the ride. "I'll ride behind you," Clara said, eyeing the arrangement. Garrett nodded. "It'll be hard going. We'll have to ride through the night to reach Silver Creek by morning." "I can manage," Clara said firmly. She had grown up on a farm in Pennsylvania and was no stranger to horses or hardship. Mr. Simmons approached them, handing Garrett a map he had hastily drawn. "The wagon train will continue on our planned route. We'll wait for you at the crossing of the North Platte for 3 days, if you haven't rejoined us by then." "We understand," Clara said, not wanting to consider the possibility that they might not return in time or at all. Garrett helped Clara onto the horse behind him. She hesitated just a moment before placing her hands around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. Thomas was secured between them, whimpering softly in his fevered sleep. "Hold tight," Garrett instructed, and with a click of his tongue the horse began moving, quickly accelerating to a steady canter. Clara looked back once at the wagon train, the people who had become her traveling family over the past 2 months growing smaller in the gathering twilight. Then she faced forward, her arms tightening around Garrett Lawson, a stranger in whose hands she had placed her son's life and her own. The rhythm of the horse beneath them became Clara's entire world as they rode into the deepening darkness. Garrett guided them across the open prairie with the confidence of a man who knew the land intimately. The moon rose, nearly full, casting enough light for them to see the terrain ahead. They stopped only briefly every few hours to rest the horse and check on Thomas. During one such stop, as Clara cradled her son while Garrett led the horse to a small stream, she felt a surge of gratitude mixed with uncertainty. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice quiet in the still night. "You could have ridden past our wagon train. This isn't your burden to bear." Garrett knelt by the stream, filling their canteens. "Let's just say I've been in positions where I needed help before. That doesn't explain why you'd risk your own safety for us." He was silent for a long moment, his back still turned to her. "I had a younger brother once. Fever took him when he was about your boy's age." He stood, turning to face her. "No doctor for 50 miles and no one willing to make the ride. By the time my father returned with help, it was too late." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago," he said, but the shadow that passed over his face told her the wound remained fresh, even after all these years. "How's he doing?" Clara looked down at Thomas. His breathing was labored, but he seemed no worse than when they'd left the wagon train. "The same, I think." Garrett nodded, returning to secure the canteens to the saddle. "We should keep moving. We've covered about 15 miles, still have a long way to go." "Will we make it by morning?" Clara asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "If we push hard and the horse holds up, yes." He helped her mount again, passing Thomas up to her while he adjusted the makeshift carrier. Once they were settled, he swung up behind her this time, his arms reaching around to take the reins. Clara found herself enclosed in his embrace, Thomas secure between them. "This might be more comfortable for a spell," he explained, his voice close to her ear. "Let me know if you need to stop again." They rode on through the night, the vast prairie stretching endlessly around them. Clara fought exhaustion, her body aching from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle. Occasionally, she would feel herself starting to drift off, only to be jolted awake by Thomas's whimpering or a change in the horse's gait. During one such moment, she felt Garrett's arm tighten slightly around her. "Lean back if you need to," he said softly. "I won't let you fall." Hesitantly, Clara allowed herself to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. There was something reassuring about his solid presence, something that made her feel protected in a way she hadn't since her husband's death. As dawn began to color the eastern sky, Thomas's condition worsened. His breathing became more labored, and his small body trembled with chills despite the warm blankets wrapped around him. "Garrett," Clara said, fear sharpening her voice. "He's getting worse." Garrett urged the horse to a faster pace. "We're close now. See that line of trees in the distance? Silver Creek follows that line. The town is just beyond." Clara squinted at the horizon where a dark smudge indicated the trees he mentioned. It seemed impossibly far away still. "How much longer?" "An hour. Maybe less if we push hard." "Push hard," Clara said firmly. Garrett didn't respond except to dig his heels into the horse's flanks, urging the tired animal to greater speed. The chestnut responded gallantly, finding reserves of energy despite the long night's journey. They rode into Silver Creek just as the sun cleared the horizon, bathing the small frontier town in golden light. It wasn't much a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a church with a small steeple, scattered houses, and a livery stable. To Clara's exhausted eyes, it looked like salvation. "Where's the doctor?" she asked as Garrett guided their horse down the main street. "End of town, that white house with the green shutters," Garrett replied, pointing to a modest dwelling set slightly apart from the other buildings. A small sign beside the gate read, "Dr. Harold Matthews." Garrett didn't bother tying up the horse, simply swinging down and helping Clara dismount, carefully passing Thomas to her before taking the boy back once she was steady on her feet. He strode to the door and knocked loudly. There was no immediate answer. Garrett knocked again, harder this time. "Coming, coming," came a voice from within, irritated at being disturbed so early. The door swung open to reveal a man in his 50s, gray-haired and bearded, pulling a robe around himself. "What in tarnation? This boy needs help," Garrett said, cutting off the doctor's complaint. "Fever getting worse by the hour." Dr. Matthews's demeanor changed instantly. He stepped back, gesturing them inside. "Bring him in. How long has he been ill?" 2 days now," Clara answered, following Garrett into the house. It started with just a slight fever, but he's gotten much worse. The doctor led them to a small examination room at the back of the house. Put him on the table there, he instructed Garrett, then turned to light a lamp. Garrett carefully untied the cloth strips that had held Thomas secure during their journey and laid the boy gently on the examination table. Clara moved immediately to her son's side, brushing sweat-dampened hair from his forehead. "You his parents?" Dr. Matthews asked as he began examining Thomas. "I'm his mother," Clara said. "This is Mr. Lawson. He brought us here when Thomas fell ill on the trail, rode all night to get us to you." The doctor glanced at Garrett with new respect. 40 miles at least from the main trail, that's quite a ride. Garrett shrugged uncomfortably. The boy needed help. Dr. Matthews turned his attention fully to Thomas, listening to his chest with a stethoscope, checking his pulse, examining his eyes and throat. "How many others in your party are ill?" "None that I know of," Clara replied. "We've been traveling with a wagon train." No one else showed any symptoms. The doctor nodded thoughtfully. "It's not typhoid then. My guess would be Rocky Mountain spotted fever, tick-borne disease. Have you noticed any unusual rashes on his body?" Clara shook her head. "I don't think so." "Check under his arms, behind his ears, between his toes," the doctor instructed. "Sometimes the rash isn't obvious at first." Clara carefully examined her son as directed, finally finding a faint reddish rash under his arm that she hadn't noticed before. "That's it," Dr. Matthews confirmed. "Nasty business, but we've caught it in time, I think. Another day, though." He left the sentence unfinished. Clara felt her knees weaken with relief, and Garrett steadied her with a hand on her arm. "What can you do for him?" she asked the doctor. "I'll give him quinine and willow bark tea for the fever. Cool compresses to bring down his temperature. The main thing is keeping him comfortable and hydrated while his body fights the infection." "Will he be all right?" Clara's voice trembled with the question she was most afraid to ask. The doctor's expression was cautiously optimistic. "He's young and appears otherwise healthy, and you got him here in time. That's in his favor." He glanced at Garrett. "Thanks to your night ride, young man." Garrett looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just did what needed doing." "Well, it may have saved this boy's life," Dr. Matthews said firmly. He turned to Clara. "He'll need to stay here for at least a few days. I have a spare room where you can rest as well. You look dead on your feet, Mrs. Anderson." "Clara Anderson. Mrs. Anderson." "I insist you get some sleep while I tend to your son." Clara shook her head. "I need to stay with him." "There's a cot in the sick room. You can sleep there if you insist, but sleep you must. You'll be no good to your boy if you collapse from exhaustion." Recognizing the wisdom in his words, Clara nodded reluctantly. "Thank you, doctor." Dr. Matthews turned to Garrett. "Mrs. Calloway runs a boarding house just down the street. Tell her I sent you and she'll give you a fair rate." "I should see to the horse first," Garrett said. "He's carried us far and fast. The livery is across from the boarding house. Old Bill will treat him right." Garrett nodded, then looked at Clara, something unspoken passing between them. "I'll check on you and the boy later if that's all right." "Of course," Clara said softly. "And thank you, Mr. Lawson. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No need for that. Just see that the boy gets well." After Garrett left, Dr. Matthews helped Clara move Thomas to a small room off the main examination area. It was simply furnished with a narrow bed and a cot beside it, but it was clean and comfortable. The doctor administered medicine to Thomas, showing Clara how to apply the cool compresses to his forehead and chest. "Try to get him to drink some water whenever he wakes," he instructed. "I'll check on him every hour. Now please, get some rest yourself." When the doctor had gone, Clara sat on the edge of Thomas's bed, watching the shallow rise and fall of his chest. For the first time since his illness had begun, she allowed herself to truly hope that he would recover. The relief was so overwhelming that tears spilled down her cheeks. She thought of Garrett Lawson, the stranger who had appeared out of nowhere and ridden through the night to bring them to safety. There had been something in his eyes when he spoke of his brother, a pain that time hadn't fully healed. She wondered about the life he led, riding alone through these vast territories. What was his story? Would she ever know? As exhaustion claimed her, Clara stretched out on the cot beside her son's bed, one hand reaching out to rest lightly on Thomas's arm, needing the reassurance of his presence even in sleep. Her last conscious thought was of storm-gray eyes and strong arms holding her secure as they rode through the darkness toward hope. When Clara awoke, sunlight was streaming through the small window of the sick room. Disoriented momentarily, she sat up quickly, her gaze immediately seeking Thomas. Her son was still asleep, but she could see that his breathing was easier, his face less flushed with fever. Dr. Matthews entered the room, nodding approvingly when he saw that Clara had rested. "You've been asleep for nearly 6 hours," he told her. "Your boy's fever broke about an hour ago." "He's better?" Clara asked, rising to stand beside Thomas's bed. "He's responding well to treatment," the doctor confirmed. "I've been giving him water and medicine while you slept. He even woke briefly and took some broth." Clara felt tears of relief sting her eyes. "Thank you, doctor. I don't know what we would have done if no need for that kind of thinking now," Dr. Matthews interrupted gently. "Your cowboy friend got you here in time. That's what matters." "Have you seen Mr. Lawson?" Clara asked, trying to sound casual. The doctor's eyes twinkled knowingly. "He stopped by about 2 hours ago to check on the boy. Didn't want to wake you. Said he'd come back this evening." He paused, studying her. "He's not the usual sort of drifter we get through these parts. There's something solid about that young man." Clara felt her cheeks warm under his perceptive gaze. "He saved Thomas's life. I'll always be grateful." The doctor hummed noncommittally. "Well, I've had Mrs. Peterson from next door bring over some clean clothes for you and a hot meal. There's a washroom through that door where you can freshen up." After the doctor left, Clara spent a few minutes at Thomas's bedside, assuring herself that he was indeed improving. His skin felt cooler to the touch, and his breathing was deep and regular. Only when she was satisfied did she take advantage of the washroom, gratefully scrubbing away the dust and sweat of their desperate journey. The clothes Mrs. Peterson had provided, a simple blue cotton dress and necessary undergarments, were slightly large but clean and comfortable. There was even a hairbrush, which Clara used to tame her tangled brown hair before braiding it neatly. She had just finished eating the hearty stew Mrs. Peterson had sent over when a soft knock sounded at the door of the sick room. Expecting the doctor, Clara called, "Come in." Instead, Garrett Lawson stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his tall frame nearly filling the opening. He had clearly taken the opportunity to clean up as well. His clothes, though still worn, were fresh, his dark hair damp from washing, his face clean-shaven. "Mr. Lawson," Clara said, rising from her chair. "Mrs. Anderson." He nodded, his eyes moving past her to the small figure in the bed. "How is he?" "Much better. His fever broke while I was sleeping. The doctor says he's responding well to treatment." Relief washed over Garrett's face. "That's good news." An awkward silence fell between them, neither quite knowing what to say now that the crisis had passed. "Please, sit down," Clara finally said, gesturing to the room's only other chair. Garrett hesitated, then entered the room fully, placing his hat on a small table before sitting down. He seemed too large for the modest furniture, his broad shoulders and long legs making the chair appear almost child-sized. "Dr. Matthews says you checked in earlier," Clara said. You should have woken me. You needed the rest, Garrett replied simply. Besides, the doctor was looking after both of you just fine. Clara studied him in the clear light of day, seeing details she had missed during their desperate night ride the small scar at his temple, the way his eyes shifted from gray to blue depending on the light, the strength in his hands as they rested on his knees. I don't know how to thank you properly, she said quietly. Garrett looked uncomfortable again. Anyone would have done the same. No, Clara said firmly. Not anyone. Not many men would risk riding 40 miles through unfamiliar territory in the dark for strangers. It wasn't entirely unfamiliar, he admitted. I've worked cattle drives through this region before. Still, Clara persisted, what you did was extraordinary. You saved my son's life. Garrett's eyes met hers, holding her gaze steadily. Then I'm glad I was there to help. A soft sound from the bed drew their attention. Thomas was stirring, his eyes fluttering open. Mama, he called weakly. Clara was instantly at his side, taking his small hand in hers. I'm here, sweetheart. How do you feel? Thirsty, Thomas mumbled. Clara helped him take small sips from a glass of water on the bedside table. Thomas's gaze drifted past her to Garrett, who had risen but remained at a respectful distance. Who's that? Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. That's Mr. Lawson, Clara explained. He brought us to the doctor when you got sick. Thomas studied Garrett with the direct curiosity of childhood. Are you a cowboy? A smile touched Garrett's lips, softening his features. Something like that. You have a horse. I do. A good one who carried us all the way here. Thomas's eyes widened slightly with interest. Can I see him when I'm better? Thomas, Clara began to admonish, but Garrett interrupted gently. Of course you can. He likes apples if you can find one for him. Thomas smiled weakly before his eyelids began to droop again. I'll find an apple, he murmured as he drifted back to sleep. Clara straightened the blankets around her son, her throat tight with emotion. When she turned back to Garrett, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. He seems like a good boy, Garrett said softly. He is, Clara agreed. He's all I have left, his father. Garrett let the question hang, not wanting to pry. Died of pneumonia last winter, Clara explained. We were farmers in Pennsylvania. After James passed, there wasn't much keeping us there. When I heard about the Oregon land grants, it seemed like a chance for a fresh start. Garrett nodded, understanding in his eyes. That takes courage, heading west alone with a child, or desperation, Clara said with a small, sad smile. What about you, Mr. Lawson? What brings you to these territories? Garrett hesitated, as if unaccustomed to sharing personal details. Been working my way west for about 7 years now. Started as a drover on the cattle trails, saved enough to buy my own small herd. I'm scouting land now, looking for the right place to start a ranch. Alone? Clara asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. I'm sorry, that's none of my business. It's all right, Garrett assured her. And yes, alone. My parents passed some years back. No other family to speak of. Clara found herself wanting to know more about this quiet, capable man, but before she could ask another question, Dr. Matthews entered the room. Ah, Mr. Lawson. Good to see you again, the doctor said jovially. I need to examine the boy now, if you don't mind giving us a few minutes. Garrett stood immediately. Of course. I should be going anyway. Will you come back tomorrow? Clara asked, surprising herself with the directness of the question. Something flickered in Garrett's eyes, pleasure perhaps at being asked. If you'd like. I would, Clara said softly. And Thomas would too, I think. Garrett nodded, retrieving his hat. Tomorrow, then. After he had gone, Dr. Matthews gave her a knowing look as he checked Thomas's pulse. Interesting young man, your Mr. Lawson. He's not my Mr. Lawson, Clara protested, feeling her cheeks warm. No. The doctor's eyes twinkled. Well, he's certainly taken an interest in your boy's recovery. Most men who have done their good deed would have moved on by now. Clara didn't know how to respond to that, so she changed the subject. How is Thomas doing? The doctor's examination was thorough but quick. Much improved. The fever's staying down and the rash is already beginning to fade. He'll need rest for a few more days, but I believe the worst has passed. When can we rejoin our wagon train? Clara asked. Dr. Matthews frowned. Not for at least a week, I'd say. The boy needs time to regain his strength before undertaking such a journey. Clara's heart sank. But they're only waiting 3 days for us at the North Platte crossing. They can't delay their journey longer than that. Then I'm afraid you'll have to find another party to travel with, the doctor said firmly. Or remain here in Silver Creek until your son is fully recovered. Rushing his recovery could lead to a relapse, which would be far more dangerous. Clara knew he was right, but the prospect of being left behind by the wagon train was frightening. She had counted on their protection for the dangerous crossing of the mountains. How often do wagon trains come through Silver Creek? She asked. Every few weeks during the summer months, the doctor replied. But smaller parties pass through more frequently. It's a common stop for those heading west. I'm sure you'll find suitable traveling companions when the time comes. After the doctor left, Clara sat beside Thomas's bed, worry creasing her brow. She had limited funds enough to pay the doctor and perhaps secure passage with another group, but not enough to remain in Silver Creek indefinitely. Thomas stirred again, his eyes opening clearer than before. Mama. Where are we? We're at the doctor's house in a town called Silver Creek, Clara explained, smoothing his hair. You've been very sick, but you're getting better now. Where's the wagon and Mrs. Holloway? They had to continue the journey. We'll catch up with them when you're stronger or find another group to travel with. Thomas's small face scrunched with concern. But what about our things? And Buttercup? Buttercup was the name he had given to the ox that pulled their wagon. Mr. Simmons promised to look after our wagon and Buttercup, Clara assured him, though privately she worried whether they would ever see their few possessions again. Don't worry about that now, just focus on getting better. Will the cowboy help us find them? Thomas asked innocently. Clara smiled at her son's simple faith in their rescuer. We'll see, sweetheart. Mr. Lawson has his own journey to make. I like him, Thomas said decisively. He's like the heroes in the stories Papa used to tell. Clara felt a pang at the mention of her late husband. Yes, I suppose he is. Now try to get some more rest. Mr. Lawson said he'd come back tomorrow to see how you're doing. Thomas smiled at this news before drifting back to sleep. Clara watched him, her mind turning over their situation. The wagon train would be gone before Thomas was well enough to travel. They would be stranded in Silver Creek, a town where they knew no one except a kindly doctor and a cowboy passing through. And yet, despite these worries, Clara felt a strange sense of calm. They had come through the worst danger. Thomas would recover. Somehow they would find their way forward. The next morning, Thomas was alert enough to sit up in bed and eat a proper breakfast. His improvement was remarkable, the resilience of youth asserting itself now that the worst of the fever had passed. When can I see the cowboy's horse? He asked between spoonfuls of porridge. Mr. Lawson said he would visit today, Clara reminded him. But you're not strong enough to leave this room yet. Thomas's face fell with disappointment. Perhaps Mr. Lawson can tell you about his horse instead, Clara suggested. I'm sure he has many interesting stories about his travels. This brightened Thomas's mood considerably. Do you think he's fought Indians or outlaws? I don't know, sweetheart, Clara said, amused by her son's romantic notions of the West. but it's not polite to ask people if they've been in fights. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Dr. Matthews entered, followed by Garrett, who was carrying a small cloth-wrapped bundle. "Look who I found on the doorstep," the doctor announced cheerfully. "And it seems he's brought offerings." Garrett looked slightly embarrassed as he approached the bed. "Good morning, Mrs. Anderson. Thomas." He held out the bundle to the boy. "Thought you might like something to pass the time while you're getting better." Thomas eagerly unwrapped the cloth to reveal a small, intricately carved wooden horse. His eyes widened with delight. "It looks just like a real horse. Did you make this?" "I did," Garrett admitted. "Whittling helps pass the evenings on the trail." "It's beautiful," Clara said, genuinely impressed by the craftsmanship. The small horse was detailed down to its flowing mane and expressive eyes. "You're very talented, Mr. Lawson." Garrett shrugged off the compliment, though Clara noticed a pleased expression cross his face. "Just something I picked up over the years." "Can you teach me?" Thomas asked eagerly. "Thomas," Clara admonished gently, "Mr. Lawson may not be staying long enough for lessons." An uncomfortable silence followed her words. Dr. Matthews, sensing the tension, excused himself to see to other patients, leaving the three of them alone. "Actually," Garrett said after a moment, "I've taken a job at the livery stable for a few weeks. Old Bill needs help breaking some new horses." Clara looked up in surprise. "You're staying in Silver Creek?" Garrett met her gaze steadily. "For a while. Seems like a good place to earn some money before heading farther west." "So you can teach me to whittle?" Thomas asked, oblivious to the undercurrents in the adult conversation. Garrett smiled at the boy. "I don't see why not, once the doctor says you're strong enough to handle a knife. With your mother's permission, of course." Clara nodded, touched by his consideration. "That's very kind of you. Can I see your horse too?" Thomas pressed his advantage. "When you're well enough to go outside," Garrett promised. "His name is Thunder on account of he's not afraid of storms. Most horses get skittish, but not him." Thomas clutched the wooden carving to his chest. "I'm going to name this one Thunder too. Is that all right?" "It's an honor," Garrett replied solemnly, though his eyes held a warmth that made Clara's heart beat a little faster. For the next hour, Garrett sat with them, answering Thomas's endless questions about life on the trail, though Clara noticed he carefully steered the conversation away from the dangers, focusing instead on the beauty of the landscapes he'd seen and amusing stories about ornery cattle and the characters he'd met along the way. Thomas was utterly captivated, his illness momentarily forgotten in the excitement of hearing about buffalo herds so vast they took days to pass and rivers wide enough to swallow entire wagons if crossed carelessly. When the boy's eyelids began to droop with fatigue, Garrett stood to leave. "I should let you rest now. Will you come back tomorrow?" Thomas asked sleepily. "If it's all right with your mother," Garrett replied, looking to Clara. "Of course," she said. "Your visits seem to be the best medicine for him." Clara walked Garrett to the front door of the doctor's house. Outside, the main street of Silver Creek was busy with midday activity, wagons passing, shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks, women carrying baskets of shopping or laundry. "Thank you for the carving," Clara said. "It was thoughtful of you." "It was nothing," Garrett replied, putting on his hat. "The boy seems to be improving quickly." "Yes, thank goodness. But Dr. Matthews says it will be at least a week before he's strong enough to travel." She hesitated, then added, "The wagon train will be gone by then." Garrett frowned. "You'll be stranded here." "Not stranded exactly. The doctor says other groups pass through regularly. We'll find someone heading to Oregon eventually." "It's not safe to travel with just anyone," Garrett said, concern evident in his voice. "There are unsavory characters on these trails." "I don't have much choice," Clara admitted. "Our funds are limited. I can't afford to stay in Silver Creek indefinitely." Garrett was quiet for a moment, seeming to wrestle with something. Finally, he said, "I've been thinking of heading to Oregon myself. The Willamette Valley is supposed to have good grazing land." Clara's heart skipped a beat at what he seemed to be suggesting. "You would consider traveling with us." "It would make sense," he said carefully, as if trying not to reveal too much of his own feelings. "I know the trails and you need protection. Thomas already trusts me. And the delay wouldn't disrupt your plans." Garrett's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "Some delays are worth making." Before Clara could respond, a commotion further down the street caught their attention. A group of men had gathered outside the saloon, their voices raised in anger. One man shoved another, sending him sprawling in the dust. "Trouble," Garrett muttered, his posture tensing as he watched the confrontation. "You should go back inside, Mrs. Anderson." "Clara," she said suddenly. "Please call me Clara." He glanced at her, surprised, then nodded. "Clara, go inside now. I'll come by tomorrow." As Clara closed the door, she saw Garrett striding toward the disturbance, his tall figure commanding attention even from a distance. She watched through the window as he reached the group of men, saying something that seemed to diffuse the tension. The men separated, the potential fight averted. Clara found herself admiring not just his courage but his calm authority. There was more to Garrett Lawson than the quiet cowboy who had appeared at their wagon train. Much more, she suspected. The next week passed in a pattern that quickly became familiar and cherished. Each morning, Garrett would stop by the doctor's house before starting work at the livery stable. He would spend time with Thomas, whose strength was returning daily, telling stories or teaching him simple card games. In the evenings, after finishing at the stable, Garrett would return, often bringing small treasures for Thomas, a particularly interesting rock, a hawk's feather, once even a harmonica that he taught the boy to play simple tunes on. On the fifth day, when Thomas was finally allowed outside for short periods, Garrett brought Thunder to meet him, patiently holding the boy on the saddle while leading the horse in a gentle circle in the doctor's small yard. Throughout these visits, Clara found herself increasingly drawn to the quiet cowboy. There was a gentleness to him that belied his rough exterior, particularly in his interactions with Thomas. And when their conversations turned to their hopes for the future, she discovered a man with dreams as substantial as her own, not just of land and cattle, but of building something meaningful that would last. "Why Oregon?" she asked one evening as they sat on the doctor's porch. Thomas had gone to bed, and they were enjoying the cool night air and the privacy to talk without a child's eager interruptions. Garrett leaned back in his chair, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "They say the Willamette Valley has everything a man could want for raising cattle: good water, rich grass, mild winters. Land's still cheap there, especially compared to California." "Is that all?" Clara asked, sensing there was more to his choice. He was quiet for a moment. "No," he finally admitted. "It's also as far west as I can go without hitting ocean. Been moving west my whole life, seems like. Running from something, maybe." "What are you running from?" Clara asked softly. Garrett's gaze remained fixed on the stars. "Memories, mostly. My father was a hard man. After my brother died, he turned mean with grief. Took it out on me and my mother. When I was 16, he caught me defending her from one of his drunken rages, beat me within an inch of my life and threw me out." Clara's hand instinctively reached for his, resting on the arm of his chair. "I'm so sorry." He looked down at her hand on his, then gently turned his palm upward, his fingers curling around hers. "It was a long time ago. I drifted east to west, taking whatever work I could find, learned the cattle business from the ground up, saved every penny. And your mother." Pain flashed across his face. She died before I could earn enough to go back for her. Neighbor wrote to tell me. Said she never stopped hoping I'd come home someday. Clara felt tears sting her eyes at the raw anguish in his voice. It wasn't your fault, Garrett. Maybe not, he conceded. But I've carried that guilt a long time. Maybe that's why I keep moving west, looking for a place far enough away that the memories can't follow. Do you think you'll find it in Oregon? Clara asked gently. For the first time, Garrett looked directly into her eyes, his own reflecting the starlight. I'm starting to think it's not about the place at all. Maybe it's about finding the right people to build new memories with. The weight of his words hung between them, full of possibility. Clara felt her heart beating faster, aware that they were approaching a threshold neither had intended to cross when he first appeared at their wagon train. Garrett, she began, uncertain what she wanted to say but feeling the need to acknowledge the growing connection between them. Before she could continue, the doctor's door opened behind them. Clara, Dr. Matthews called softly, Thomas is asking for you. I think he had a bad dream. The moment broken, Clara withdrew her hand from Garrett's. I should go to him. Garrett nodded, standing as she did. Of course. Good night, Clara. Good night, she replied, lingering just a moment before turning to go inside, feeling his gaze follow her until the door closed between them. Thomas's nightmare had been about getting lost on the trail, separated from both Clara and the wagon train. It took some time to soothe him back to sleep, reassuring him that they were safe and would remain together. As Clara sat beside her sleeping son, she reflected on Garrett's words. She too had been seeking not just a place but a fresh start, new memories to overlay the pain of loss. Oregon had seemed like the answer, but now she wondered if perhaps the answer had found them instead, in the form of a cowboy who had ridden out of the darkness when they needed him most. The next morning brought news that would test their newfound connection. A merchant arrived in Silver Creek, bringing mail and information from farther west. Among his news was word that a major bridge across the Snake River had been washed out by recent storms, forcing all westbound travelers to take a longer, more difficult southern route. It'll add at least 2 weeks to the journey, Garrett explained to Clara when he came to the doctor's house later that day. And it's rough country, especially for a wagon. Clara felt her heart sink. Will it be safe for Thomas? Garrett hesitated, clearly torn between honesty and not wanting to frighten her. It's not the route I would choose for a child still recovering from illness, he admitted finally. The water is scarce in places, and there's less game for hunting. The heat will be worse too this time of year. What are our options? Clara asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite her growing concern. Garrett ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of his inner conflict. We could wait here in Silver Creek until October when the bridge might be repaired. Or. He hesitated. Or, Clara prompted. There's land here too, he said quietly. Not as much free land as in Oregon, but good grazing country. I was talking to Bill at the livery. He says the valley just north of here has rich soil, plenty of water. A few families have started farms there in the last year or two. Clara studied his face, understanding what he was suggesting. You're thinking of staying here, in the Dakota Territory. Garrett nodded. It's something to consider. The winters are harder than Oregon, but the land is good. And we'd be near a town with a doctor. His eyes met hers. For Thomas, the fact that he was including her and Thomas in his plans was not lost on Clara. You'd give up your dream of Oregon for us. Maybe Oregon was never the real dream, Garrett said, his voice low and earnest. Maybe it was just a direction to travel until I found what I was really looking for. Clara's heart raced at his words, but caution held her back. They had known each other barely 2 weeks, and yet, in that short time, she had come to trust this man more than anyone since James had died. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This isn't just about me. Thomas's future depends on the choice I make." "I understand," Garrett assured her. "There's no rush to decide. But circumstances soon force their hand." That evening, Dr. Matthews called Clara into his office while Garrett was entertaining Thomas with stories of his cattle driving days. "I've had a letter from a doctor in Bozeman," he explained. "He's in urgent need of assistance influenza outbreak. I'll be leaving tomorrow." "What about Thomas?" Clara asked, alarmed. "He's still not fully recovered." "The boy is doing remarkably well," Dr. Matthews assured her. "Another few days of rest and he'll be as good as new, but you can't stay here while I'm gone. I need the house for my replacement who's arriving from Cheyenne." Clara felt panic rising within her. "But where will we go? We can't set out for Oregon yet." The doctor's eyes twinkled knowingly. "I believe your Mr. Lawson might have a solution if you'd care to ask him." "He's not my," Clara began automatically, then stopped, her cheeks warming. "I'll speak with him." When Garrett arrived the next morning, Clara explained their situation while Thomas was still sleeping. Garrett listened without interruption, his expression growing more resolved with each word. "I've been thinking about this," he said when she finished. "There's a small cabin about 3 miles north of town. Belongs to a trapper named Ferguson who only uses it in winter. Bill at the livery says Ferguson wouldn't mind if someone stayed there during the summer months, kept the place from falling to ruin." "You've been making inquiries," Clara observed, not sure whether to be touched or concerned by his forethought. Garrett had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I wanted to be prepared in case you decided to stay, or needed more time to decide." Clara took a deep breath. "And what exactly are you proposing, Mr. Lawson?" He met her gaze steadily. "I'm proposing that I escort you and Thomas to the cabin, help you get settled there. I'll camp nearby. There's good grazing for the horses along the creek. It would give Thomas time to fully recover, and you time to decide what you want to do next, without the pressure of having to leave the doctor's house. And if we decide to continue to Oregon, then I'll take you as far as you want to go," Garrett said simply. "I gave my word that I would see you safely to your destination, whatever you decide that is." Clara searched his face, looking for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She found none, only honest concern and something deeper, a feeling that mirrored her own growing attachment. "And if we decide to stay?" she asked softly. Something kindled in Garrett's eyes, hope, perhaps. "Then I'd hope to be a part of the life you build here, if you'll have me." The directness of his answer took her breath away. Before she could respond, Thomas called from the bedroom, and the moment passed, the question hanging unanswered between them. 2 days later, Clara found herself unpacking their few belongings in the trapper's cabin. It was a modest structure, one main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom off to one side, and a lean-to at the back that served as a kitchen. The furnishings were simple but sturdy. A table with benches, a rocking chair by the fireplace, a bed frame in the bedroom that Garrett had fitted with a fresh straw mattress covered in clean ticking. True to his word, Garrett had set up his camp by the creek, a respectful distance that maintained propriety while keeping him close enough to provide protection and assistance. Each morning, he would ride to town to work at the livery stable, returning in the evening with supplies and news from Silver Creek. Thomas, fully recovered now and bursting with energy, took to their new situation with childlike enthusiasm. He explored the area around the cabin, always within sight of either Clara or Garrett, collecting interesting stones and sticks, watching wildlife, and pestering Garrett with questions about everything from how to track deer to how to build a fire. With each passing day, Clara found herself settling into a rhythm that felt increasingly like the life she had dreamed of when heading west, not the specific location, perhaps, but the sense of purpose and possibility. She planted a small garden with seeds given to them by Mrs. Peterson from town, repaired and improved the cabin with Garrett's help, and began to see how a future might take shape here in this valley. And with each passing day, her feelings for Garrett deepened. She saw how patient he was with Thomas, how respectful of her own space and decisions, how tirelessly he worked to make their temporary home comfortable. At night, after Thomas was asleep, they would often sit outside the cabin, talking about their pasts and their hopes for the future, gradually building a foundation of understanding and trust. One evening, about 2 weeks after they had moved to the cabin, Garrett returned from town with news. "Ferguson's going to sell the cabin and the surrounding 100 acres, he told Clara as they sat by a small fire outside. Thomas had been put to bed an hour earlier, exhausted from a day spent helping Garrett repair the cabin's roof. "Sell it," Clara repeated, dismayed at the thought of having to leave the place that had begun to feel like home. "To whom?" Garrett stared into the fire, his expression unreadable. "To me, if I want it." Clara's heart seemed to stop for a moment. "You." He looked up at her then, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I've been saving for years to buy land. This is good land, water, timber, grazing. Ferguson's price is fair." "You're really considering it?" Clara asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the hope swelling within her. "I am," Garrett said. "But before I make any offer, I need to know what you're planning. If you still want to go to Oregon—" "I don't," Clara interrupted, the certainty of her decision surprising even herself. "I want to stay here." The relief on Garrett's face was immediate and profound. "You're sure? What about the free land in Oregon?" Clara smiled softly. "It turns out the land wasn't what I was really looking for either." Garrett set aside his coffee cup and moved to sit beside her on the bench. Hesitantly, he took her hands in his. "Clara, I need to be clear about something. I'm not just offering to buy this land for myself. I'm hoping. That is, I was thinking." Clara had never seen the confident cowboy so flustered. "Yes, Garrett," he took a deep breath. "I'm asking if you and Thomas would consider staying, not just in the territory but here, with me." "As your what?" Clara asked, needing to hear him say it. "As my wife," Garrett said, his voice growing stronger with certainty. "And my son, if Thomas would have me as a father. I know it's sudden, and I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you, about both of you." Clara felt tears fill her eyes. "Garrett, you don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "I know it's a lot to consider, and I want you to be sure." "We can wait." Clara stopped his words by leaning forward and pressing her lips gently to his. When she pulled back, both of them were breathing faster, a flush coloring Garrett's tanned cheeks. "I don't need to wait," Clara said softly. "The answer is yes." Garrett's face transformed with joy, years seeming to fall away as he pulled her into his arms. "You mean it? You'll marry me?" "Yes," Clara laughed through her tears. Though Thomas might have something to say about it, Garrett's expression grew serious. "I would never try to replace his father. But I'll love him as my own, Clara, I swear it." "I know you will," Clara said, touching his cheek gently. "He already adores you." As if summoned by their discussion, a small voice called from the cabin doorway. "Mama, Garrett." They turned to see Thomas standing there in his nightshirt, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "What are you doing out of bed, sweetheart?" Clara asked, wiping away her tears. "I had a dream," Thomas said, coming to stand beside them. "That Garrett was going to stay with us forever. Is he?" Clara and Garrett exchanged glances, both smiling at the perfect timing of the child's question. "Would you like that?" Garrett asked carefully. Thomas nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, then you could teach me to ride Thunder and build a ranch like you said." "Well," Garrett said, lifting the boy to sit between them on the bench. "I just asked your mother if she would marry me. That means we would be a family. You, me, and your mother." Thomas's eyes widened. Like a new papa, Garrett looked to Clara, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes," he said gently. "Like a new papa. But I know you had a papa before who loved you very much. I would never try to take his place in your heart. There's room for both of us there." Thomas considered this solemnly, then asked, "Would we still go to Oregon?" "No," Clara answered. "We would stay here. This would be our home. Garrett is going to buy this land and build a ranch, with horses and cows." Garrett smiled. "Lots of horses and cows, and maybe some chickens too." "And a dog," Thomas pressed, seizing his advantage. "I think a ranch needs a good dog," Garrett agreed seriously. This sealed the deal for Thomas. He threw his arms around Garrett's neck. "Then yes, you can marry Mama and be my new papa." Over the boy's head, Garrett's eyes met Clara's, both of them fighting tears at the child's wholehearted acceptance. "Well, that's settled then," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "Now back to bed with you, young man. We have a busy day tomorrow." "Can I help build the ranch?" Thomas asked as Garrett carried him back to the cabin. "Every step of the way," Garrett promised. "It'll be your ranch too." After tucking Thomas back into bed, Garrett returned to Clara by the fire. He sat beside her, taking her hands in his once more. "Are you really sure about this? It won't be easy starting from scratch." Clara squeezed his hands. "I've never been more certain of anything. When James died, I thought that part of my life was over. I never expected to find love again, especially not in the middle of nowhere when my child was desperately ill. Sometimes the best things find us when we're not looking for them," Garrett said softly. "Like a cowboy who rides all night to fetch a doctor," Clara agreed, leaning into his embrace as he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. They sat together, watching the fire burn down to embers, planning their future in quiet voices, the ranch they would build, the life they would create together. When the night grew cool, Garrett reluctantly stood to return to his camp by the creek. "Just a few more weeks of propriety," he said, smiling down at her. "Then you'll never be rid of me. Promise?" Clara asked, rising to stand before him. Garrett's answer was to draw her into his arms, his kiss a pledge more binding than any words could be. 3 weeks later, Clara stood before the mirror in Mrs. Peterson's spare bedroom, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. The blue calico dress was new, made specially for the occasion by the women of Silver Creek, who had taken Clara under their wing when they learned of the impending wedding. Her hair was arranged in soft waves around her face, adorned with wildflowers that Thomas had helped gather that morning. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Peterson said, adjusting the flowers slightly. "Your young man won't know what hit him." Clara smiled, thinking of Garrett. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Peterson, for the dress, for hosting us, for making us feel welcome here." "Nonsense," the older woman said briskly, though her eyes were warm. "It's not every day we get a wedding in Silver Creek. Besides, that boy of yours has charmed every person in town, and Garrett has proven himself a good man. We're glad to have you all staying." A knock at the door announced Mrs. Holloway, who had arrived in Silver Creek just the day before. The wagon train had returned to civilization sooner than expected due to illness among some of the travelers, and Mrs. Holloway had decided to remain in Dakota Territory rather than continue to Oregon. "Land sakes, girl, you're a vision," Mrs. Holloway declared. "That cowboy of yours is pacing a hole in the church floor waiting for you." Clara embraced the older woman. "I'm so glad you made it in time. Wouldn't have missed it, Mrs. Holloway said gruffly, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. "Now, are you ready? There's quite a crowd gathered." Clara nodded, suddenly nervous. It seemed the entire population of Silver Creek had turned out for the wedding, along with farmers and ranchers from the surrounding area, all curious about the young widow and the cowboy who had risked so much to save her son. Thomas appeared in the doorway, resplendent in new clothes and wearing an expression of solemn importance. "Mama, the preacher says it's time. I'm supposed to escort you." Clara smiled at her son's serious demeanor. "Then I suppose we shouldn't keep them waiting." The small church was indeed full to bursting, the townspeople having turned the wedding into something of a community celebration. But as Clara walked down the aisle on her son's arm, she saw only Garrett, standing tall and straight beside the preacher, his eyes never leaving hers. He had cleaned up impressively for the occasion, wearing new clothes purchased in town, a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven. But it was the look in his eyes that took Clara's breath away, a mixture of awe, adoration, and a joy so profound it seemed to illuminate him from within. When she reached him, Thomas solemnly placed her hand in Garrett's, just as they had practiced. "Take good care of my mama," he instructed, his small voice carrying in the quiet church. A ripple of affectionate laughter ran through the congregation as Garrett nodded seriously. "I promise, son." The ceremony itself was simple and brief, the preacher's words traditional but heartfelt. When it came time for the vows, Garrett's voice was steady and sure, his hands warm around Clara's as he promised to love, honor, and protect her all the days of his life. Clara's own voice trembled slightly as she made the same promises, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment, from the desperate night ride with a sick child to this new beginning. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." Garrett's kiss was gentle and reverent, mindful of their audience but still conveying the depth of his feelings. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Lawson, Clara felt Thomas slip his small hand into hers, completing their family circle. The celebration afterward was lively, held in the town square with food contributed by every household in Silver Creek. There was music and dancing, children running and playing, and a sense of community that Clara had not experienced since leaving her hometown in Pennsylvania. As evening approached, Garrett found Clara sitting with Mrs. Holloway, watching Thomas play with the other children. "Ready to head home, Mrs. Lawson?" he asked, still sounding slightly awed at addressing her by her new name. "Home," Clara repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, I think we are." They said their goodbyes, promising to return to town the following week for supplies. Thomas, exhausted from the excitement of the day, fell asleep almost immediately after Garrett lifted him onto Thunder's back. They rode together, Garrett holding Thomas securely while Clara rode the second horse they had purchased from the livery stable, a gentle mare named Daisy that even Thomas could manage on level ground. Their cabin now welcomed them with the golden light of sunset. Ferguson had signed over the deed just the day before, making the property officially theirs. While it was still modest, Garrett had already begun improvements, with plans to expand the structure over the winter and begin building proper barns and corrals in the spring. After settling Thomas in his bed in what had been the cabin's only bedroom, Garrett showed Clara the surprise he had prepared during her absence that day, a new room he had begun adding to the cabin, with walls now partially framed and a roof already in place. "It's not finished yet," he apologized, "but I wanted to have something ready for tonight. Our room." Clara was touched by the gesture, by the work he had clearly put into creating this space for them. A proper bed had already been installed, brought from town in secret with the help of Bill from the livery. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their wedding night, Clara rested her head on Garrett's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Are you happy?" he asked softly, his hand gently stroking her hair. Clara raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again," she answered truthfully. "When Thomas fell ill on the trail, I was terrified I would lose him too. Instead, I found you, found us." Garrett pulled her close, his kiss a promise of the lifetime they would share. "I love you, Clara Lawson," he whispered against her hair. "And I love you, Garrett Lawson," she replied, settling into the circle of his arms where she knew she belonged. 5 years later, Clara stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching Garrett and Thomas return from checking the northern pasture where their growing herd of cattle grazed. The small cabin had evolved into a proper ranch house, with multiple bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a comfortable living area centered around the original stone fireplace. Thomas, now 10, rode his own horse, a pinto named Scout that Garrett had given him on his 9th birthday. He had grown tall and strong, showing a natural aptitude for ranch work and inheriting Garrett's love of the land. Though he still kept the small wooden horse carving on the shelf above his bed, he now preferred the real animals that populated the thriving ranch. Clara's hand rested on her swollen belly, where their second child, a daughter, she felt certain was due in just over a month. Their first child together, 3-year-old James, named for Clara's first husband at Garrett's insistence, played at her feet with the wooden animals Garrett continued to carve in the evenings. "Mama, look," Thomas called, spurring Scout into a faster trot to reach the house ahead of Garrett. "Pa let me rope a stray calf all by myself." Clara smiled at the pride in her son's voice and the way he naturally called Garrett Pa now, the transition having occurred gradually and without pressure. Thomas still kept a small portrait of his birth father in his room and occasionally asked questions about him, which both Clara and Garrett answered honestly and with respect. But there was no doubt that Thomas considered Garrett his father in all the ways that mattered day to day. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Clara called back. "Wash up before supper. Mrs. Holloway is coming over with that new family that just moved in down the valley." Thomas dismounted with the easy grace he had learned from Garrett, leading Scout toward the barn to care for him before coming inside. Garrett followed more slowly, his expression softening as it always did when he looked at Clara. "How's my girl?" he asked as he approached the porch, reaching out to place a gentle hand on her belly. "Active today," Clara replied, placing her hand over his as the baby kicked against his palm. "She knows her papa's voice." Garrett grinned, still amazed at the miracle of new life after all this time. "She, is it? You sound pretty certain. Just a feeling," Clara said. "Thomas is hoping for a brother to even things out." "As long as she's healthy and looks like her mama, I'll be happy," Garrett declared, leaning down to kiss Clara tenderly. Little James tugged at Garrett's pant leg. "Pa, horse," he demanded, holding up one of the wooden toys. Garrett swooped the boy up into his arms. "Is that right?" "And where's this horse going to live?" "With the cows," James declared, pointing to the other wooden animals arranged in a careful pattern on the porch floor. "Well, that makes perfect sense," Garrett agreed solemnly. "But first, this little cowboy needs to help his mama set the table for our guests." As Garrett carried James inside, Thomas joined Clara on the porch, freshly washed and changed for supper. "The herd looks good, Ma," he reported. "Pa says we might get a good price when the buyers come through next month." Clara smiled at her firstborn, seeing both the child he had been and the man he was becoming. "I'm sure we will. Your pa has a good eye for cattle." Thomas leaned against the porch railing, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd made it to Oregon? If I hadn't gotten sick on the trail?" Clara considered the question, understanding its importance to her son. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted. "We might have had a good life there too." But then we wouldn't have found Garrett or this ranch or little James, and your sister wouldn't be on the way. I'm glad I got sick, Thomas said decisively. Not about being sick exactly, but about how it turned out. Pa says sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us to the best things in our lives. Clara felt her heart swell with love for both her son and the man who had become such a wise and loving father to him. Your pa is a very smart man, Clara, Garrett called from inside. Mrs. Holloway's wagon is coming up the drive. Coming, she called back, taking Thomas's arm as they went inside to welcome their guests and celebrate another day in the life they had built together, a life that had begun with a desperate ride through the night, a cowboy's courage, and love that had found them when they needed it most.